Welcome to the Everything Co-working podcast. This is your host, Jamie Rousseau. Thank you for joining me. If you're brand new, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Today, we're going to talk about benchmarks. And before we dive in, I want to invite you to something I am very excited about. And it's an idea that came out of this pain point I feel. I work with a lot of operators in groups, one on one, in all sorts of ways, and community managers. And I have a lot of insights into how businesses are working, what's not working. And one of the advantages of the work I do is that I get a broader picture of the industry overall. And I want you to have that same perspective. And it's hard for you as an independent operator to know what's going on in the businesses of others, what to expect out of your own business based on how you've created it and what the model is. And this will not be perfect because your business is probably a little bit of a snowflake. No two co-working businesses are exactly the same, but when I work with operators, I like to work from benchmarks that again are not perfect, but we have to start somewhere. So when I work with an operator, then I start with, okay, what are your goals and what's possible? You can't have goals that are not possible for this business model. And then if you are not hitting your goals, so either you're just starting and we need to know what are we looking to achieve, or you're already operating and you have a gap that you'd like to hit. Usually you're not as profitable as you'd like to be. And we're trying to figure out, okay, what is the gap and what is possible? And then setting expectations. And the beautiful thing about this process is then you have clarity around what is possible for your business, what the levers are that you can pull to increase revenue and profit. And then you also know you have a realistic sense of what your business can produce, usually based on your location, your real estate deal, your product mix, etc. And then you can make your life decisions and your business decisions based on information. And it's hard to do that when you're operating as an operator of one, or even if you have multiple locations, you know what different locations look like, but you don't necessarily know what you're supposed to expect out of this business. And there's not a lot of data because we have a couple of public companies in the industry, and that is it. And we just aren't there yet. And so I want to provide some way for you to know what to expect out of your business. So I've created a new session, a new live event called the Coworking Scorecard, Measure What Matters. And we're going to walk through benchmarks that tend to define healthy, profitable co-working spaces, like the what's possible. And I'll show you how to use your own data to uncover what's working for you, what may not be, and really where your opportunities are. And again, this is so you can get some clarity and a reality check around what is possible and what's likely for your business, and then what. You can make some decisions around how you want to spend your time, where you want to invest, etc. I'd love for you to come. Please come live because I think it'll be a great conversation. You don't have to share any dirty secrets about your P&L. But you can ask questions, you can share and interact with other operators. And anytime we get a chance to do that, I think it's really magical. Everythingcoworking.com/scorecard. It's going to be Thursday, October 23rd at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific time. And we will have a replay up for a short time because I know not everyone can make it live, but please try to come live. It'll be a great experience if you can. Okay, so we're going to talk about some related topics today. I just want to share some insights around aspects of businesses that I see related to benchmarks that might help you think about your own business and the way you think about your own business, what data you're tracking, and what you're looking for. I work with a number of operators and dig into their businesses. And sometimes it takes even me a little while to figure out, okay, what's really happening here because I'm relying on the operator to present data. And of course, as we go, we're getting better at assessing like what inputs do we need to know to really like get to the bottom of something really quickly. But I'll give you a couple of examples of what I tend to see, which you might be doing in your own business around data and benchmarking. I often see operators really focused on filling offices. So I'm working with an operator right now, and the big focus was on offices, and they're implementing a new system so that they have a lot more transparency in their business. But I finally was looking at, okay, what is your actual occupancy and where are the vacancies? It turns out that if you take into account everything except one pretty large team suite that they have, their occupancy is actually almost 90%. That's really pretty significant. And speaking of benchmarks, about what we'd expect. You're going to have some vacancies, you're going to have some churn every single month. And if your vacancy is 95, if your occupancy is 95%, then you're probably not charging enough. So it's pretty healthy to hit 90%. Certainly, when we do pro formas for new spaces, we like to sandbag a little bit. And it may be that you have expenses that are really high and you have to hit 90% occupancy in order to be profitable. That should make you a little nervous if you're starting a new space. I just talked to an operator today who's looking at a second gen space, and he should be profitable at 75% occupancy, and that is a dream. So, back to my client example here, they're really focused on investing in ads to fill offices. When actually, aside from this large team suite, which, as you all know, those leads are hard to come by and usually require some scrappy marketing. So the ad spend on Google Ads, we have to really, and that's what we're in the process of doing now. Does this make sense? Certainly, there's some turnover coming up. So you don't want to turn off a marketing lever unless you've really thought through it. But the focus on we have to fill these offices was a little bit misplaced. The team suite that is, I think it's 600 square feet. So it's pretty significant. And just to zoom out, when I work with a client, I'm thinking about what is the target revenue per square foot? Have they hit that target? And if not, where are the gaps? So this client has not hit that target. And so we're looking at, okay, how do we get there? And we're doing a lot of things across the board. But again, the focus internally really seems to be on offices when that is not the actual revenue gap that we could fill in order to get to the revenue per square foot. That team suite, which is pretty significant, again, about 600 square feet, 7 desks, is a big one. They have a very large training room that is almost never used. They don't charge members for meeting rooms and have very little meeting room revenue. And they had a very small mail business and no events. And so, really, in order to hit that revenue per square foot, we have to drive revenue across the board, not just nudge the occupancy up from 90 to 95%. So make sure you're looking at the whole picture of your business, what's the target revenue per square foot is, and what are all the levers to pull to get there? And can you really do it just by having your offices be full? And pricing is another topic. We're going to talk about that on another podcast. Another example that I see is feeling like the real problem is that we need more leads. You feel like you don't have enough leads. And that's the issue with generating revenue. And we've talked about this before, so I won't belabor this one too much, but it bears repeating because I see it often. And that is just that leads are not managed well. And that is like probably the number one thing you could do to really impact your revenue. Of course, when you look at a co-working business, there are a lot of aspects that contribute to top of funnel, member experience, conversion rate, lifetime value of a member, et cetera. But the basic whole is usually that you don't have the right person managing leads, responding to leads. You're not responding to them quickly enough. They're coming in for a tour. They're not getting any follow up to address objections or just to show that, hey, you really want them in the space. So you have this vague feeling that you don't have enough leads because let's face it, as entrepreneurs, we would always like more leads. When really the issue is managing the leads, follow up with the leads. And it is unusual to see a team that handles that really well. And that is something that you really have to look at the data on, make sure that there are KPIs in place around and that the people that are responsible for those leads are really aware of what the expectations are and held to those expectations. And I would argue that, as I have before, that if you don't have the right people on the team to follow up with those leads, then you might need to outsource it. Gio and I just did an episode, it's not live yet. So, preview to come an episode with Richie Parsons, who is an owner of several Venture X locations. And he talked about the working genius assessment and how he's using that framework in his business. And if you are familiar at all with the framework, if you're not, you should listen to the podcast. If you are, one of the roles is, I'm not going to get this exactly right, but tenacity, which is basically relentless follow up. And he shared that on their team of 16, they only had one person that ranked high for, or green, I think it is, for tenacity. So they have strong enablement, which I think is a typical community manager profile, but very little tenacity. And the tenacity is, I'm in the CRM, I'm following up, I'm responding to leads as they come in, I'm addressing objections, I'm so committed to this. So you might need to outsource that role if you don't have it on the team, or add a team member, but we'll talk about that. I'll use that as a transition into another benchmark, which is just broad profitability. So a lot of co-working space owners, I see these messages in the Facebook group, et cetera, talk about, I'm not quite hitting profitability. And sometimes that's a revenue issue, and sometimes that's an expense issue. And one of the issues I tend to see is that owners want to put on that CEO hat, and then they inflate their team. The co-working business needs to be run really leanly to hit target margins, which we're going to talk about in our benchmarking session. And unfortunately, I feel like we're in this like mixed message, like paradox phase where everyone's talking about hospitality, which requires humans, and humans who aren't sitting in the CRM responding to leads or managing vacancies that are coming up, et cetera, like really managing the sales funnel, but that they have the headspace to be really hospitality focused. And your staff needs to be pretty lean. So it's unlikely that you can have folks with multiple hats on a per location basis. So if you have multiple locations, you might have gotten to the point where you have an executive team that can take on really specific functions. But this is a challenging business to run with a couple of locations because there are a lot of roles that need to be filled, and you have to keep it really lean in order to hit those profit margin goals. So I see what is the word I used? Balloons get inflated teams often because you have this checklist in your brain of things that need to get done, and you want to be excellent at each of those things, and you feel like you need more people in order to get that done. It's also a challenging business because it is an in-person business, right? So you need community managers who are at the front desk every day. So you need some buffer staff in case they can't come in, they get sick. And so we do need to have extra people on the team, but we have to manage that so carefully. The expense side of this business is so critical. And I wish there was more buffer and that we could really lean into having a lot of support on the team, especially if you're the kind of operator who's hired or who's gotten into this business, not because you want to actually operate, but because you want to own this type of business and you want a team to do all the things. I see that happen a lot where the team is just too big. You have too many full-time people assigned to the business and pulling down your profit margin. So we'll talk about some ways to manage that and profit margin expectations and staffing ratios on the benchmarking session, which you can register for by going to everythingcoworking.com/scorecard. Another challenge I see is this. And if you are working on opening a co-working space, I want you to try to avoid getting to this place. And if you already have a space, this may sound familiar to you, which is that you have a large number of members, but you're not profitable yet. And that is because your revenue per member is just too low. So you might be doing a great job at pulling in members at your lowest membership option, like the $100 a month, the $150 a month. that is easy to sell, but you have to sell so many of those that your sales funnel or your market demand are just not set up to do that. Or yeah, so you in your pro forma, you might have pro forma'd that you would have 200 members paying $300 a month to be flex members, and you have some offices and some other ancillary member revenue, but the full-time co-working memberships at that higher price point don't sell. You never got even close to the number that you put in your pro forma. And so now what you have is a lot of members at a really low price point, and that's really challenging because your cost structure is much higher than it can be in order to get a profit margin and cover your costs with a lot of lower priced memberships. And I think, again, as entrepreneurs, we tend to make a lot of assumptions, especially for solving a personal pain point. What I want is a $200 membership of FlexSpace. I just want to leave the house and I want a community, I want a place to go, and everyone I know will buy this membership. And it feels like that's a no-brainer, when in reality, it's a discretionary spend and there's more churn, and it takes a lot of lower price memberships in order to hit your break even point and to turn a profit. So that's really common, is that, okay, I have a lot of members, but the revenue mix is off. We have to find a way to increase that revenue per member or adjust something in your sales funnel or your product mix in order to sell higher priced memberships to get profitable. And I think it's really important, if you're in this boat, to understand, like, what's the reality check? Is this going to get better? Or is this my steady state and I need to figure out another way to get profitable or another way to add revenue to this business? So these are just stories that I see playing out in, these are situations that I see playing out in the co-working world. And one or more of these might apply to you. And I think it's a matter of knowing, again, what's typical, what's realistic, what can I expect? If I have a gap between the profitability that I expected and what's actual, what can be done about it? Is it realistic to expect a certain level of profitability? So, what are those metrics? And what are the levers that I can pull? What actions can I take in order to get closer to what your expectations were, or even to have a sustainable business? So, we're going to dive into this in more detail in our benchmarking session. We'd love to have you there. Everythingcoworking.com/scorecard.